Most interesting thing in tech, how much exactly is China censoring its major AI models? Researchers at Princeton and Stanford have a new paper that systematically looks at this question. That's pretty interesting. So first thing they did is they take a ton of questions, hundreds of questions, and they politically sensitive questions, and they ask the American models and they ask the Chinese models. What you see is that the Chinese models are much less likely to answer questions about Tiananmen Square or particular dissidents. Sometimes, in fact, when asking about dissidents, they will make up biographies out of whole cloth. They will just say this person is someone they are not, which is an interesting separate problem. Okay, so systematically measuring this thing we already know is true. Here gets the interesting thing. So how much of the censorship is because of the training data, and how much of it is because of post-training? How much of the censorship problem is just because the data that Chinese models are trained on has already been censored for a long time? They have a clever way of doing this. They take all of the models and they ask queries in English and in Mandarin, and they measure the non-response rate. And it turns out that in even the American models, even in ChatGPT, if you ask a politically sensitive question in Mandarin, you are more likely to get a non-response than if you ask it in English. The same, of course, is true in DeepSeek. And that's not because ChatGPT has filters saying, hey, don't answer these questions. It's just because of the data that it's been trained on. So what the researchers have found is that some of the difference in censorship is because of the training data, but it doesn't fully explain it. In fact, it doesn't come particularly close to explaining the whole gap between the American models and the Chinese models. So there's clearly pre-training data, and there's clearly something going on in post-training, which is presumably researchers saying, oh, okay, well, the Chinese government wants this. It also might be from human feedback, right? If you have Chinese raters responding to answers, they may be more conservative, or they may already have kind of absorbed rules of censorship, which would be a third way that these models can be shaped. Why does this matter? Well, in part, because the Chinese open source models are going to be the tools on which a lot of stuff is built. And a lot of stuff is going to be built on models that have this kind of interesting underlying censorship. And we don't know what the implications are, but I don't know, you can imagine in the future some delivery app that has been built on these censored models, and it's built by an outside company, and it won't go to certain regions in Beijing because of the censored data. I don't know. The implications are really complicated, but it's today's most interesting thing in tech.